welcome to the Echo Oscar Delta podcast, where we talk to Navy EOD techs and hear the stories that they want to share. All ideas, thoughts, and statements are those of the guest and the host of Echo Oscar Delta, and not of Navy EOD or Navy as a whole. Today on the podcast, we have retired Commander Stephen Phillips. He did 20 years in the Navy, was EOD, and outside of the Navy has written a book and Proximity. Sorry, almost didn't say it, but written the book Proximity, and then has a new book coming out that we'll get to as we go to this. You've done a lot in the Navy, you've done a lot outside of the Navy. There's a lot that I left out there, but we got however long you've got to get into that. So trying to figure out where to start. Actually, where do you want to start?
Yeah. So I'll say this, it all started with a book. How about that?
Nice.
I've heard some of the stories from other EOD techs, both on the podcast and over the years, right? And everybody's journey is different. It's curious how many people come in the Navy even and are not necessarily aware of EOD. But I was. As a young kid, I read a book by a guy named Rob White, Rob spelled R-O-B-B, and it was called The Frogmen. And the story takes place in World War II. It was a novel for kids to read. And it was about sailors who go to a mine warfare school and learn how to do mine disposal, and then go to scuba school and learn how to dive. And then they go on a secret mission where they go into Japanese territorial waters and they disarm these mines and everything. And so for me, I read that and said, I think I want to be a Navy diver. And I already had an idea of serving in the Navy. I'm in the middle of multi-generational naval service. My grandfather, my father, I did, my brother did, my son serves. And so that sort of got me interested in becoming a diver and thinking about that. And at the time, I didn't understand, and it took a while before I understood all the nuances of spec war, EOD, salvage, Seabees, and the like. But that started my journey. And I went from there and I got PADI qualified. And so, yeah, when I started on my Navy journey, it was, I'm going to be a Navy diver and I'm going to do this bomb disposal thing.
That's awesome. How, with all the service in your family, were any of them divers or any type of special programs, or?
Nope, I'm the only one.
Nice.
My grandfather was a steward's mate in the Second World War. My dad was a surface warfare officer. Back then, they called it line when he was in the Navy. And then I started as a SWO. I had to lateral transfer to get into EOD. And then my brother was a SWO, and my son is a helicopter pilot. So I'm the only diver, only special program guy.
That's awesome. That's cool. So you started as a SWO, where along that process did you transfer or transition to EOD?
So let me back up to when I was at the Naval Academy. So when I was blessed that I had the opportunity to go to the Academy. I'm in the class of 1992. And while I was there, I learned that midshipmen could go to dive school. And so I tried out for that. They had a screening process. And so the summer after my plebe year, which is youngster summer, your sophomore year, they call it youngster year, I went to Panama City, Florida, and was in a class with like 30 other midshipmen. I think that summer they had 2 classes of 30 in Panama City, and then they had a couple of midshipmen went to Fort Island, and a couple midshipmen went to Little Creek. There actually was a scuba school in Little Creek then also. So I went through Panama City. I got the scuba bubble. And it was there that I then started to understand everything, because the cadre there, we had EOD folks, we had, I don't remember if there were spec war on the staff, but there were salvage guys and Seabees and everything. And so I came out from that experience and said, okay, I want to do this EOD thing. And so I geared myself from that point moving forward to an EOD career. And as an example, my first class cruise, so this is the summer before my senior year, I asked to go on a minesweeper. At that time, 1140s had to get a SWO pin. So you had to go and do some time on board a ship. It would usually be a salvage ship or a minesweeper. I think some of them went on ammunition ships and the like, but you had to do that and get a SWO pin. So I wanted that experience. And so I went to USS Enhance out of Tacoma, Washington at the time, an MSO. And then I also went to the experimental diving unit And again, because I had a scuba pin, I could go and do stuff down there. There's a longer story about that cruise. It was really about a naval architecture midshipman thing. But so then I screened, and when you graduated back then, it was different. It was class rank only. So for any special job like nuke power, you had to screen, or if you wanted to be a pilot, of course, you had to do the medical. So I had to do the medical, and I passed that. I did the screener, I passed that. But that was just pass or fail. It made me eligible to select EOD. And then after that was class rank. And so quite frankly, I was in the bottom part of the class. And so there were less billets then too. There were only 6 EOD billets at the time. So I just basically wasn't able to select it. So I purposely chose a small ship with a diesel plant because I knew salvage ships and MSOs and MCMs had diesel plants on board. And ended up going to the USS Harlan County, LST 1196. And so aggressively, the deal at that point is you have to get your SWO pin, and then you can apply to lateral transfer. So I worked like a dog, got my SWO pin, applied for lateral transfer. And as part of that, you had to do the screener again. So like anybody who's a wannabe, right? And I went to EOD Mobile Unit 2. I was in Little Creek, so I went to Mobile Unit 2. Did the screener, did the interview, did well on that. The officer who interviewed me wrote me a really nice recommendation, and so yeah, off to the races. So submitted that, and then was waiting to hear from the detailer. When the detailer came back, he said, "Look, you're really competitive. I'm not going to pick you up this time, but I encourage you to apply again." I ended up going to a second ship. Then I went to USS San Jacinto, so I went from an LST to an Aegis cruiser, and so then there, I did the whole thing again, and I had to screen again. At that time, I went to Det Norfolk. I screened with them, passed the screener, got a letter of recommendation, sent that off, and so then I got picked up the second time. So after about 4 years in the fleet, 2 ships and 3 deployments, I was at sea. I was gone a lot. Then I finally, in the spring of '97, was when I started the process of BDO, and from there.
Okay, nice. That's man, it stinks for you to have to like screen multiple times, right? But that's good to hear for those that didn't get picked up the first time. Like just because you don't get picked up the first time, you still got to keep that motivation and keep trying, especially if it's something that you really want to do.
Absolutely. And I have told that to many folks along the way. And as you can imagine, there were times I was on the other side of that table where I was with a detachment that screened a wannabe and then interviewed them and encouraged them, if they didn't get picked up the first time. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, and you went to EOD school. So spending time in the fleet as a SWO, and then you go to EOD school. The difference between the way officers enlisted interact out in the fleet is a little different than in EOD. Although I have heard on the Minesweepers that it's a little closer because it's such a small crew.
Yeah, for sure.
Was it what you expected? And then whether it was or not, how did you like that interaction between the officer enlisted going through school and then moving on?
Right. I definitely knew that there was a closer relationship in the EOD field. It was much more so than I imagined. And so I was ready for it to a certain extent. But then I was surprised at different steps along the way when I really faced it. Part of it was in school, guys in my class. I was the senior officer in my class. They, gave me a hard time and everything. And I'm thick-skinned, and I just rolled with it. But it did. At the first couple of times, it would surprise me. I'd be like, okay, all right, this is how it goes. And I remember the first time when I reported aboard my first EOD Mobile Unit 6 detachment, and I walked in the door, and so like people are walking around in like shorts and Tevas and T-shirts, and I was in whites. I still had my fleet thing, like I had my record and everything. And that day they were like, "Okay, we're going to drink beer," and I was like, "We're drinking beer in the shop," and they were like, "Yeah, that's it." And so again, I was like, okay, I'm going to take this on board. So yeah, it was a surprise. It was a culture shock, so to speak.
Now you went to, going through school, first, I guess, how was school for you? Was it, cause after going to the academy and doing a lot of things, you're used to some pressure. There's
Right.
from what I've heard about the academy, it's
Yeah.
you don't just get to do whatever you want the whole time.
That is true. Right.
How was your school EOD school portion time?
Yeah. I did okay. I didn't think the academics were difficult. I mean, you're right. It's a challenge to get through things. And so the things that I struggled with, I think sometimes were the physical things. I had problems in rigging and air, for example. I failed my share of tests. So that was all, I had that problem. But the studying part in general for me was just put in the hours and make sure you do it. Yeah. Dive school, of course, it helped. I'd gone through before. I had sort of a leg up in going through scuba school. That was basically the first 6 weeks of BDO. I remember, in fact, giving my class a hard time. So I have a scuba pin. They know that I've been through this before. And so then pool week is happening and you hear like the alarm goes off as they start to take somebody to the chamber and everybody's nervous or whatever. And I remember at one point the class like looked around and they were like, Steve, so what's the deal? Like pool week, like what's happening? And I was like, guys, I just have to tell you what, after going through pool week, there's only one thing that scares me about being in the water. And that's pool week, and they were all just like, ah. So it did help going through that, a second time, going through BDO. The first 6 weeks, it was sort of like I had a leg up, so to speak. So EOD school was a challenge, but I was prepped for it. I had the academic background for it, so I was ready.
Nice. Then getting to your first mobile unit, I think I ask this to almost everybody because I think about back when I went, got through school and you're like, what you're told about and what you're exposed to in EOD before you go to school is one thing. And then when you're going through, you start to get an expectation that's another, and then you show up. And then as the weeks and months go by, was it what you expected when you showed up to your first mobile unit and started actually training and doing the EOD job?
Yeah, it was a little different for me. And part of the reason was I went to the EOD Mobile Unit 6 Detachment 4 in Ingleside, Texas. So this is curious. I think it was a little bit of a unique experience. So being in Little Creek, I had been exposed to Mobile Unit 2. I'd screened over there, and I didn't just walk in the door and screen. As you can imagine, I walked over there. I asked some questions. I got introduced to another 1140 that had been a SWO, that had lateral transfer. He gave me some guidance. So I was doing a little wannabe stuff. And so that gave me a little bit of background. And then I actually spent some time on the George Washington. And I remembered that I wanted to tell you this story too, because I thought this was, it's a fun story. So when I'm on San Jacinto, on our deployment, I got sent over to the USS George Washington for about 2 weeks at a time out of every 6 weeks. There were 3 officers. We were on a rotation to go there and augment the staff. And so I'm like, there's an EOD det on board. I want to learn some stuff. I'm going to go back there. And so I found out where they were. I'm going to guess it's the same on most carriers. They were all the way aft on the port side between the hangar and the flight deck. And I went in and I introduced myself. So again, it's at this point, I've got a SWO pin, I got a scuba bubble. And I said, I've submitted a package for lateral transfer. On my time that I'm here, I'd like to come hang out. I'd like to PT with you guys to keep in shape. And they were like, yep, sure. Okay. You want to be a wannabe and everything. I hung out a little bit in the shop that day. And then the next day they said, we PT on the hangar deck, come down. So I showed up and I had the whole thing, man. I had the mat, I had my blue and gold on, black shorts. I'm ready. And it was just the circle PT thing. And they start off, jumping jacks, begin. Right. And we're going around and around and around and around and push-ups and sit-ups. And some of it was stretching, push-ups and then press fling and flutter kicks and 8-count bodybuilders. And they're going on and on and on and on. And I'm having an internal dialogue in my head of like, dude, you have to step up your game. Like, this is bad. And I was like, I thought I knew what I was getting myself into, and so again, the inner dialogue was like, but okay, this is why you do this. Like that now you gotta. And so we finish and I am just, I'm wrecked, and they said, okay, good job, LT, and we went up to the shop and hung out and I was there for a little bit. Then I had to go do my thing. I wasn't standing watch, but I had duties that I had to do with this liaison thing. So I show up the next day. I'm ready to go, roll out my mat, blue and gold t-shirt, black shorts, and they begin. They're like, 25 jumping jacks, begin, out, right? And we do that. And they finish the first, whatever it is, and halt. And then I look and they all like have these big grins on their faces. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, did I do something wrong? Is my shirt on backwards? What's happening? And I think it was the senior chief was next to me and he put his hand on my shoulder. He's like, Lieutenant, we don't PT like that. He was like, this is like our filter. This is our indoctrination thing. And he said, we killed you yesterday. And he said, we do this to every wannabe and we see, do they want to come back?
That's
and he was
awesome.
like, so you came back. You can hang out in the shop. We are not going to PT today. We're going up. They had donuts and everything. So guys are rolling up their thing and we're walking up and they're like going, ow, ow, like lactic acid. Like I was in with those guys after that. So I asked the OIC, I asked him, will you write me a letter of recommendation? He wrote me a letter. I'm sure that helped me get in, but now, so coming back to Ingleside, Texas, I had this exposure to Mobile Unit 2 of a command structure there and all of the detachments and everybody's in-house and there's sort of this whole thing. So at the time, EOD Mobile Unit 6 is in Charleston, South Carolina. And I had to go through there to go to Mobile Unit 6, Ingleside. And so at the time, Ingleside, Texas was called the Mine Warfare Center of Excellence. They had like the Mineman A school there, and they had a bunch of other mineman schools. They had a whole bunch of the MCMs, the Avenger class. They had a whole bunch of MHCs, the Osprey. USS Incheon was there. That was the LPH that had been converted into a mine warfare command ship. And so I did check in Charleston, but then I went down to Ingleside, Texas. They had two detachments there, Detachment 4 and Detachment 2. There were MCM detachments. And at the time, also, Mobile Unit 6, almost all their debts were MCM. They might have had like one mobile debt, but most of them, and they had, when I first got there, we had, they had sea lines. They had like ordnance clearance, ordnance recovery sea lines. So then I went down to Ingleside, Texas. And so it was not exactly what I expected because I'd been exposed to Mobile Unit 2. I walked in there and it was like, now my perception, it was like being at a shore detachment because we were 2 time zones away from our command in Charleston, South Carolina. And that definitely had impact over the time that I think we had more freedom down there and maybe even had some more responsibility as a result. And every now and again, of course, somebody would come down. Every now and again, like the operations officer would come down, like they'd be planning an exercise or something like that, and they'd show up. So it was not exactly what I expected. I think it was a fun situation. I think in some ways it gave me more responsibility as an OIC for that first tour. Mm-hmm. I think I was ready for it though, because I had some SWO background before. And one wonders, I've never even thought about this, but I wonder if the detailer, thought of that, because I didn't get chosen. I was told you are going to Ingleside, and so maybe because I had some fleet experience, he wanted to send me down there. Yeah.
Yeah. Excuse me. I think one of the things, let's see, when I first came in, that was kind of the end of the officers being told to go to the fleet first and then come through. And there's a lot of benefit to actually doing that, which I'm sure there's a bunch of officers that are like, Jerron, be quiet. No, there's not. There's no benefit at all. But there's a huge benefit because you know how the Navy works. So you can show up, and when you're in charge of a platoon, or especially out there in charge of a det that's away, you've got an idea of like the things that you need to survive in the Navy that your people need, which is a benefit. And then it's always nice to be a little bit away from the flagpole.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Coming out of or I should say, going to Det Ingleside, being that like mine warfare center, and having, let's see, that would be about, you got there, you said 96, 97?
97, I went to dive school, graduated from that the summer of 97, went to EOD school the summer then of summer of 97.
Okay.
And so my EOD class and so I was one of the last classes to go through Indian Head. So did phase 1 at Eglin, then went up to Indian Head and was 10 Bravo 98. So graduated from EOD school summer 98 from Indian Head, and then went to Ingleside from there. So summer 98, I showed up August of 1998 at Ingleside.
Nice. So, and that's kind of, what, 5 to 8 years removed from the Gulf War, where guys were diving on mines and getting after it.
Right.
Was some of that knowledge still there, or yeah?
Absolutely. So, for example, the senior chief on my detachment, I had two, but the senior chief, that he had been one of those divers. His name's Senior Chief Clay Hedricks. Sadly,
Okay.
he passed away this year.
Yeah.
I went and visited him in April before he passed away, and God rest his soul. But so, as an example, that happened. Clay was a young third-class petty officer, slick bomb at Mobile Unit 2, and deployed to Operation Ernest Will, and was doing that mine warfare thing. I think I met other EOD techs along the way. Then it's interesting, in the early part of my career, both in surface warfare and in EOD, because you're right, it was not that long ago. I've met a lot of people that served in that conflict, and so that definitely had an impact on me, and is why I've always been interested in that piece of history.
Yeah. With focusing on that, how did you like the MCM mission set?
Yeah, I ended up falling in love with it. I think it's a fun mission, and definitely worthwhile and important. And so it's interesting. Again, I was influenced by, there I was in Little Creek, and I had this vision of, I'm going to go to Mobile Unit 2, and I thought I'll do, a mobile detachment. I'll be with an ARG. I'll be on a carrier. And when I went to Ingleside, I was kind of bummed. I was like, really didn't want to do an MCM thing. I ended up falling in love with the mission set. I love diving. I love the whole thing about it. I became fascinated with it as a problem set. So, I think I recommend it to anyone. If you have a choice, I would choose to go on an MCM det again.
Nice. Then, and being a det down there, did you deploy out of Ingleside?
We did. Again, it's interesting. The relationship down there was sort of like being at a shore detachment, but we were a seagoing detachment that we would deploy. So as an example, we had a memorandum of understanding with the San Patricio Police Department. And so we didn't have beeper duty, but we would get calls. And if we got called, we would respond and go and do stuff with San Patricio out in town. We had a base response also. So again, it wasn't a watch. It was more like if something goes down and we call you, you're supposed to go. And that was shared by both of the detachments that were down there. And then those two dets typically would deploy to Bahrain. There was a sort of a rotational MCM detachment in Bahrain, and both of those detachments would go and do that. And then I actually deployed on the Incheon in 1999. I think of this as the high watermark of MCM. It's the only regular scheduled MCM deployment. So what do I mean by that? So Blue Harrier, for example, was an MCM exercise that they did. That's not a deployment, that's an exercise, and it planned, but an exercise. MCM flotillas have deployed in times of war to go and do mine warfare stuff like Operation Ernest Will or Operation Iraqi Freedom, right? I'm sure that we sent MCM assets there for that. So this was it was not war, and it was just a regularly scheduled deployment with the intention of going to the Mediterranean and the Gulf and train with our partners. And so on board the Incheon, so she was a LPH amphibious aircraft carrier that was configured to be a mine warfare command ship. So embarked was the mine warfare command staffed MCM RON 2, 4 EOD detachments, 1 from Mobile Unit 3 and 3 from Mobile Unit 6. There was a diver recompression chamber with a diving dock and all those folks there. They had HM-14 and HM-15. The minesweeping helicopters were on board. So just the whole thing was configured to do this MCM mission. As a matter of fact, I remember Dwayne Oliveira Ali was on, and he talked a little bit about this. He was on the MCM, the Det 3 MCM detachment that was aboard. So we go to the Mediterranean, and we did like exercises with the Spanish and exercise. Oh, and we also had 4 MCMs deployed with us. I bet I could look it up. It was like Scout, Gladiator, Avenger. I don't remember the 4th one, but so the 4 MCMs crossed over with us. And so we did training with the Spanish. We did training with the French. We actually did a huge diving operation with the French in Toulon. But then Kosovo happened. We were just outside the Suez Canal, getting ready to go through the Suez to go around to the Persian Gulf, and we were going to do training with partners in the Middle East, like the Saudis and the Bahrainis, etc. when the Kosovo thing happened. Slobodan Milosevic went into Kosovo to kick out the ethnic Albanians. So again, my history is not going to be exactly right, but apparently, like during the Ottoman Empire, the Serbs were punished by the Ottomans. They kicked out the Serbs out of Kosovo. They forcibly moved Albanians into Kosovo, which is like the breadbasket of that region. And he was trying to correct that. So it was that, Yugoslavian ethnic cleansing thing that happens. He went in there. They were killing all the military age males. Everybody pours over the border. So we were sort of the closest asset that could provide heavy lift humanitarian aid. So the deployment turned into Incheon goes into the Adriatic. And we got into this pattern where every morning, 4 to 6 of those big MH-53 helicopters, now stripped completely down, all the MCM gear taken out, with 4 or 5 EOD techs for force protection, would fly into Tirana International Airport. Humanitarian aid was coming in from the Air Force C-5s and C-130s. They'd push out these pallets of humanitarian aid that then get loaded in the helicopters, and then we would fly them to not we, I wasn't flying, but you know what I mean? They would fly up to places like Kukesh, which was on the border, and we would basically provide force protection for them while the humanitarian aid was dropped out for them. So we did that for a couple of months. I think we started in March and we were there until June. And then I think it was an ARG, like a Marine, group came in and they took that over from us after that. Later on in the conflict, I seem to remember too that we were moving people. At first, the snows in the mountains were so deep that the people could get over the border, but they couldn't get out of the mountains into the lower part of the country. And then later on, combination. Some people I think moved by road, but I think we also flew up there and moved people and moved them down to like camps in the lower part of the country that the CBs had built for them. So yeah, interesting deployment. And then we all came back, and I remember also we pulled into Spain, Rota, Spain, and it was an election year. And it was the Governor Bush, the son was running for office, I think then, and they needed us for Secret Service protection, and so. They flew all of us, nearly all of us. We left behind, a couple of people to watch our gear, but the vast majority of us flew back on a C-130 so that they could. It was 18 days, I think, crossing the Atlantic to come back, and they were like, "That's 18 days times all these EOD techs of Secret Service work they'll get during the election year." So yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, it's cool to hear stuff like that because it shows how diverse EOD techs can be. Like you go out deploying with the idea that you're going to do MCM things, and then one of the things that we're trained in from day one is how to use weapons and how to protect ourselves and take a fight too. And so now you can be used as force protection. Like
right,
that's pretty cool.
It is interesting to think about it. So you're right, exactly that. I was on an MCM det and did more mobile det stuff than some, not everyone, but because I know I compared notes with, shipmates and classmates, and they'd say like, well, yeah, I was on this float on the carrier and nothing happened and we never got to leave. What? You got off the ship and you were carrying guns around? Like, what's happening? So. Yeah,
that's awesome. After Kosovo, what was your next stop?
Yeah, so we were in Kosovo for a while, and then I think we hit a couple of ports on the way back. I seem to remember going to Palma de Mallorca, Spain. I feel like maybe we hit another French port on the way back. And and so then it was, like I said, Rota, Spain, and everybody flew back. And then we had a long period of time of Secret Service work. Yeah. Being in Texas, I was on Governor Bush's detail a couple of times. And then, or at least maybe it was just once, but I did his detail once once. And then we did the 1999, the classic UN General Assembly stuff, and so folks went up there for that. So yeah, I had kind of like a season of Secret Service work there for a while, and so that was the Incheon deployment was my only deployment while I was down there in Ingleside. But we did do a lot of exercises, and because we were there, all the different squadrons there would send out their mine hunters and their minesweepers to go and do MCM X's, and they called them GOMEXs for Gulf of Mexico. I know we've now changed the name. That's what it was called at the time. Gulf of Mexico exercise. And there was another one, RONX, I think, was for squadron exercise. And so the two detachments that were there, we would go out a lot, and sometimes we would ride on the mine hunters, mine sweepers, and sometimes we'd go out from shore, like we'd just launch in a rib, and we'd go out and dive for the day, dive marks for them, and then come back and that kind of thing. And then we did mine shape recovery. Also, we'd go out, and after an exercise happened, we'd go out and dive the marks and help recover stuff and everything. So it definitely, we did a lot of diving there. There was no question about that.
Yeah. Something that just kind of caught me. I don't know if it kind of catches me off guard, but it is how different we do MCM now. Like when you're deploying with that ship, it's so many MCM assets of basically you can start and finish everything all from that ship. And
right.
Man, now everything has to be hodgepodge together. It seems like
right.
But I won't get too much into that.
I'll tell you what's interesting for me is to imagine how different things changed over the years. So let's go back to my shipmate Clay Hedricks. So when Clay first started diving MCM, they were diving with a Diablo, so they did not have GPS.
Mm-hmm.
So what would happen is you'd be in a boat with a Diablo over the side, and the MCM would use the sonar to guide the ship, the boat, over to where the mark was, so that you could then go dive on the mark, or drop a float, like drop a clump and put a mark on it, so that you would come back and dive later. And so it was slow then. It was still slow when I got into it, but by this time, what would happen is, like those Osprey class mine hunters, they would hunt through the night, and we'd be on bed, on board in bed, getting our Z's, and we'd wake up in the morning. And they'd have a sheet of marks for us, and they'd say, "Hey, here's 10 marks that we found last night. We want you to go dive." So we'd deploy, dive the marks with go dive those GPS marks, and they'd continue to hunt. They're in another field hunting. So that obviously was a little bit faster. Well, now I imagine what's interesting is we have this technology that it's a lot of stuff is take the person out of the minefield, mm-hmm. right? Launch a UUV, have it go and search and find things, and probably has a better picture of what's in the water than, what a mine sweeper can find with a sonar.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's crazy the level of detail they can get now, depending on what system they use and whatnot. And there's options now to. There's so much detail that you can just say, I don't even need to dive somebody on this. I know what that is.
Right.
And then other ones, all right, we're going to throw somebody down on this one. But
yeah,
it is crazy the way technology has changed things. So after Ingleside, where did you go?
Yeah. So for a lot of reasons, I decided that I was going to leave active duty at that point. It's a curious thing after going on this long journey of trying to become an EOD guy. And then after that first attachment, as I was coming to the end of it, it's a long story. We'd probably need to have some whiskey in a fireplace to tell that one, cigar or something, but another day, another podcast if interested. But so for a lot of reasons, I decided that I was going to leave active duty, but did not want to leave completely. And so I joined the reserves. And so at that time we had reserve EOD units then. Mm-hmm. On the East Coast, it was Mobile Unit 10 was actually in Fort Story, Virginia, and Mobile Unit 12 was in Charleston. I was moving back to the greater Washington, D.C. area. I talked with the reserve detailer and with the command there at Mobile Unit 10. And so I ended up going and becoming an officer in charge there. So I was OIC of same detachment number. So I went from Ingleside, Texas, Mobile Unit 6, Detachment 4, then Mobile Unit 10, Detachment 4. And so that was your standard reserve weekend. There was a cadre of folks that ran the mobile unit. Some of them were TARS. I think it was called training and something of reserves, or training and administration of reserves. So they were folks that they were active duty people, but part of their job was to train reservists. And we'd come in on a Friday and, ready to go and train on the weekend. A typical weekend was one in which we'd come in on Friday night, do a little bit of setup, go in on Saturday. Saturday would often be a diving day. Sometimes we do other stuff. Sometimes we do shooting or something like that. But Saturday was normally a diving day. And then Sunday was often administrative stuff and roll out. So do that, 1 week in a month. And then we'd have a 2-week exercise throughout the year. And we had reservists that were recalled. It's an interesting thing. At the time, EOD was undermanned. I don't know how it's manned now, but then we were undermanned, and so we had reserve EOD detachments that would get recalled and would go and do things. So this is even before the war, before 9/11 happened. As an example, there was a Mobile Unit 10 det that was doing the force protection mission in Bahrain. So there was a Mobile Unit 6 det that was there doing the MCM mission. There was a Mobile Unit 10 det that was there for force protection. We might have even had a Mobile Unit 10 det doing a force protection mission in the Med at that time also. Yeah. So I was there up until 9/11. It was right around a year. I left active duty in August of 2000. I had day-for-day accountability. I was sworn in the reserves on September 1st of 2000. Was doing the drilling weekend thing, and then 9/11 happened. And I recently talked with the CO last spring, and we talked about this, and I was trying to remember if my memory was correct, and he said it was. And I said, I think we knew that day that we were getting recalled. And he said, that's right. So what happened, again, my 9/11 story, like everybody's a longer story, but so basically 9/11 happens, and then I was recalled to active duty. They recalled 2 detachments from Mobile Unit 10, 2 from Mobile Unit 12. And they said, what's going to happen is you're going to do force protection, 2 in the States and 2 overseas in the Mediterranean. The Med went to condition Delta, and so had a requirement, force protection requirement that included an EOD detachment and went down to 6 core ports. And so my team went through training and evaluation unit 2, workup and FEP'd out. And we went and we're gone. We left on the Saturday after Thanksgiving and flew out and became a Mobile Unit 8 detachment. So we show up at Mobile Unit 8 and they said, Omni Domni, you're now a Mobile Unit 8 detachment. And then we thought we were going to arrive and just go and get farmed out to go from there, and that they'd be like, OpCon, TACCon of us. But they ended up saying that they treated us almost like a pool of folks, and they ended up moving folks around. So again, another one, Chris Rudiger has talked about it on his podcast with you. He ended up being my LPO. So people got shuffled around. And so suddenly I had a detachment that in fact had Mobile Unit 10, Mobile Unit 12, and Mobile Unit 8 sailors all together. And I was OIC of the detachment in Suda Bay, Crete. And so ended up doing force protection there for a year. It's interesting, Jaron. It was really, really busy. It was this interesting mix of when we first arrived. At first, we were on edge, right? We thought, when's the next attack going to come, right? And we were very busy. The rule was we had to dive. If no one was in port, we had to dive once every 3 days. And the port it was Greek. There was a NATO part of the base, and then there was a U.S. part of the base, and we were responsible for the whole waterfront. So if nobody was in port, we dove the piers once every 3 days. If any ship was coming in, we would dive the pier prior to their arrival. And there was a standing requirement that all ships, all duty sections had to do limpet mine training. So a ship would come in, that's 3 days of limpet mine training. We had to do limpet mine training response with all of them. Naturally, we had IED response on the base and the like. And what we realized very quickly was, like most force protection efforts, we were a deterrent, right? If anybody ever came, so in effect, we were busy, but nothing ever happened. And that was pretty quickly. I said, if anybody ever comes and looks at this, they're going to look at us and go like, well, you're not going to get a goal. You're just going to, get one of these diver guys. Like, why bother? So I think we became a deterrent. A lot of training, a lot of diving. Did pass X diving with divers who came through. So like an ARG would come through, we would dive with the EOD guys and the SEALs. We did not have our own Mark 16s, but everybody was Mark 16 qualified. So like we had once an ARG came in and they said, can we dive with you? And we said, sure, but let's dive Mark 16. And they did. So we dove Mark 16 and everything. Nice. And so it was busy time, but a fun time. And we ended up connecting with the Greek divers that were across the way. So we ended up working with those guys, which was great. So it was, I'll be honest with you, we worked hard and we played hard. It was fun, busy, but fun.
I could see that. Suda Bay is not a bad place to have to go for a year.
Yeah. It's there are worse places. There were folks that were in like Gaeta and, other places. I was like, no, thanks.
Yeah. No, that is one of the, it's a balance long-term though. Being the deterrent, is absolutely like necessary so that you just don't have another 9/11, right?
Right.
But long term, I think one of the things that's not thought about is you start that and then you're like, okay, cool. We're not having any issues because we're there. We're just going to keep doing this indefinitely. But there's that whole, base posture where there's a posture that you can hold indefinitely. Then there's a
Right.
posture that you can hold for a certain amount of time. And then there's a posture
Right.
that you might only be able to hold for a couple weeks. Who knows what phase we're in that now, but
Yeah. Definitely the case. And so it bore out. It was one of the reasons that we ended up being there for a year was here in the States. The original plan was we were going to be there for 6 months and then swap. So we'd come back. And I was actually on the phone with my relief planning the arrival of the next Mobile Unit 10 detachment. And he said, yeah, we're getting stood down and going home, and you guys are being extended. I was like, what? He was like, yeah, you need to call the captain. So it was a year recall. It was supposed to be a year recall, 6-month deployment, and it turned into a year recall and a year deployment.
Man. Yeah. So you were activated from reserves at the time,
correct,
right?
Mm-hmm.
How I've never actually talked to or asked this question. Now, obviously, you're working for a civilian company in your non-reserve time,
correct,
and they're expecting like, okay, and then there's laws that say they have to give you your job back.
Right.
How did that go when you actually came back?
Yeah, it was great. So the company that I worked for was a defense contractor.
Okay.
It was the office I was in Crystal City. So I was like, a couple blocks away from the Pentagon on 9/11. They were very supportive. So first, no surprise, when the transition happens, the Navy didn't know how to pay us. And so there was I was like, isn't there just a box you click in a computer and all of a sudden I start getting paid again, or paid on a regular basis? We were getting paid as reservists, but obviously it's all prorated or whatever.
Yeah.
We went a long time without getting paid. I think we didn't get paid until like February or March of 2002.
Oh, wow.
So my company was so supportive. They knew that it was happening in reservists everywhere. I mean, there were reservists in the Pentagon, and so my company, and I wasn't the only one that was recalled. I was the only EOD guy there, but there were other folks from my company that got recalled. So what they did was they covered us and they said, what we're going to do is we're just going to keep paying you and we'll resolve all this later. But it was a challenge. I had sailors, I had a seaman on my team, and he was a commercial diver that was getting paid by the hour as a commercial diver. He comes back on active duty, and he's not getting paid. And so that was a challenge for a while to work through that. So my company was clearly more supportive than others.
Yeah.
When I transitioned back, same thing. My job was waiting for me, and I was communicating with them as the time was coming up. And I there were like emails, and I was saying like, hey, here's when I think I'm going to be demobilized. And they were very supportive and said, hey, your job's here for you when you come right back. No problem. I know that some people did have issues. I had a guy on my detachment owned his own company. He had his own small company, and of course it went under when he was gone. He didn't, the laws couldn't help you there, right? If there's no work, if you're not there, your company goes under. So I know that it's a challenge for some people when that happens, but by and large, I think most people companies appreciate it. And especially after 9/11, there was, a lot of patriotism. A lot of people appreciated what we were doing.
Yeah. So after you got back from that deployment and then went back to work, what was the next EOD thing that you did?
Yeah, it wasn't really EOD, but my next Navy Reserve job was at what is now called National Intelligence University. At the time, it was called Joint Military Intelligence College. And so this is in the military's, educational system. I think it's under now the National War College, which I think is in DC.
Okay. Yep.
And I had heard about this from others, and there was another EOD guy that I knew that went through it at the time. And the process was you could apply, and it was intended for intelligence professionals, but you did not have to be an intelligence professional to go. My undergraduate degree was in political science. I had studied a lot of low-intensity conflict and defense intelligence stuff. And so for me, it was a natural thing to go and do this program as a reservist. So the standard program is year-long. at that time was at the Defense Intelligence Agency in what's the Air Force base there? Bolling Air Force Base.
Okay.
And so for a normal intelligence professional, they'd go, and it's 1 year master's program. You get a master's of science in strategic intelligence. Well, they had a reserve program, and they called it reserve and/or executive format. And in that, it was reserve faculty, reserve students, and then the students also had civilians. So they were like FBI, CIA, the State Department has their own intelligence arm. And so those folks were there. They thought of it as an executive format. I'm billeted in Washington, D.C., and I go to graduate school 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summertime, because it was geared towards that reserve format. So it took me 2 years. I completed that, and I ended up then with a Master of Science in Strategic Intelligence, which as an EOD guy gave me a subspecialty. So now I had a subspecialty code in intelligence. So then I ended up staying on board as a faculty member. So now I was teaching, and I really enjoyed that. So I did that for a little bit. And so by this time I'm in 04, and I ended up, I'm like, what am I going to do next? And I ended up going to, by this time now also I think I showed up as an 04. Let me back up 2 steps. When I was at Mobian at 8, I pinned on 04 when I was at Mobian at 8 at post 9/11. So when I went through the school, I was an 04. I became an 05 at that point. So, okay, cool. Did this educational thing. And it was one of those, went through the course, taught a little bit. Now it's time to come back to an EOD billet. Well, by this time, all the EOD Mob units, the reserve Mob units are all gone. So there's no, and I think even the reserve MUDSU units were gone. Like there was no, like, where am I going to go now? There's no, and so what I found out was there was a NAVC activity at Stumpnick where the EOD school was when I went through there. And it was like the only place that an EOD officer could go and be in an EOD billet. So my choice basically was like, go and be on some generic staff someplace, go to some, just some job someplace in the reserves, or do that. So I went there, and what it was it was a NAVC activity, and it was a reserve SEXI platoon, Combined Explosives Exploitation Cell. So I went there and was the training officer, and I was hoping to try to become the CO. That ended up not working out. The reserves are a little bit different for this. For some of the jobs, you have to apply. So it's not like there's a screening and like a detailer picks a person as the CO. It's sort of like a board that picks and even picks the person to go on the billet. I didn't get the billet, so I didn't fleet up to CO. And so I said earlier, my son, by this time, he started going to the Naval Academy. And so again, it was one of these where I kind of was like, all right, this has been a really fun experience. It's been very rewarding. I'm coming up on 20 years. I kind of got this message that I'm not going to be the CO. Thanks for playing, Steve. And so then I retired from there. So my last billet was training officer of the reserve SEXI platoon at Stumpneck.
Okay, nice. That's interesting. The intel portion, which is cool. I know, like when I first came in 2006, and then get into a mobile unit, and like 2009, 2010 time frame, the intel side of things was heavily pushed. Obviously, we don't risk our lives for intel, but if we can get it, we want it, because now, we were just talking about this the other day, where it seems like sometimes we get too far on the other side now, where we're like, nah, we don't need to get that intel. But then when you're asking all the questions, you're like, where do you think all the answers to these questions come from? So having that actual intelligence background is kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed it for sure.
Yeah. Then getting completely out, like finishing your time. When did you? So a book got you in, and then
that's right.
When did you decide that you wanted to try and write a book?
Yeah, back to the book story. So it's interesting. When I was the SWO, I dabbled a little bit in writing. Let me back up 2 steps. I always enjoyed creative writing. I come from a family of storytellers. My family's the kind of folks we sit around Sunday night or sit around the fire pit and trade sea stories.
Nice.
And then as a young kid, for whatever reason, I really enjoyed writing. Like when you take those creative writing classes and stuff, I enjoyed that. I was writing a lot as a political science major. I enjoyed writing about research and writing history, research and writing political science stuff. So after I graduated from the academy, I just had sort of like, I'm going to dabble in writing. And I started writing a book first about the Naval Academy. And it just dabbled, like free time here and there, a few moments I'd work on it. A lot of the ideas were in my head. So then it was when I was in Ingleside, Texas, that I encountered this fact that at the time, very few people knew what an EOD tech was. I think that's one thing that was different when I first came in compared to now. Part of it is people now know what an IED is. Yeah. We went through an IED fight in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Naval Special Warfare folks have become more well-known. And so as a result, we've become more well-known. There was a movie out, all those things. And so but that wasn't the case in the late 90s, even up to 9/11. And as an example, on the base in Ingleside, Texas, I'd walk around and with my EOD crab, and again, back then officers had silver crab, right? I didn't have the gold crab. So with the silver crab, I got asked this more than one time. So what, are you like, I don't recognize that. It's not jump wings. Are you prior Air Force or what's the story? And I'd say like, well, no, I'm an EOD tech. And they'd say, what's that? And I'd go through the whole thing. I'm a diver. I blow stuff up. And they're like, oh, you're a SEAL. No, I'm not that either. Or like I'd go through that. I don't know if that still happens, but at that time in this community, oh my gosh, that was happening. So yeah. I had this thing of like, I'm going to write a book to explain this community and who we are. And so I started writing that after I got out. And so I was a train commuter into DC. I lived closer to Annapolis. I spent a lot of time writing on the train, weekends, wake up in the morning, put the kids in front of the TV, write a little bit. And then I finished it during that year of recall. So again, there I was in Suda Bay, and I'd have these moments in the evening. My family wasn't with me. I was there by myself. And so I actually finished Proximity, the EOD book, when I was in Suda Bay, and then went through the process of, I submitted it to the Navy, and I started with the command. I submitted to the command. I was like, I think I'm supposed to have somebody review this and make sure. I was pretty sure I hadn't written anything classified, right? But you want to do the thing. Yeah. So I did that. I went through the whole process. The Navy reviewed it. They authorized it for public release. And so that first one, Proximity, got published, I think in 2007, late 2007. So then it did relatively well. And so I was trying to launch then the next one. And so I ended up connecting with the Naval Institute Press, and I pitched the Naval Academy book. It's called The Recipient, Son. And so it's set at the Naval Academy. And the basic premise for that one is it's a midshipman coming of age story. So if you're the son or daughter of a Medal of Honor recipient, you have automatic acceptance to a service academy. So the main character in that book, his father dies in Vietnam posthumously. He goes to the academy, and then he learns to identify with the father that he never knew growing up. And so then that's where that came from. It's interesting. Whenever I encounter folks in the community, I'm always curious who has read it, who has heard of it, who has seen it or not. When it first came out, I was happy that I got a positive response from a lot of folks. Like I had this happen on more than one occasion where my phone would ring and I'd see it's a shipmate. I'd pick it up and they're laughing. And I'm like, what? And they're like, dude, I just read the part of the book when you said that. They're like, I know exactly what you're talking about. I remember that, And so it was an interesting thing in structuring it. I had this thing of, I'm going back to Proximity now.
Yeah.
How do I introduce to an audience this career field that people don't know or understand? And so for those who haven't read it, it's a little bit of a spoiler alert, but I start off with, there's one character that is, this is going to all sound familiar, an EOD tech on the George Washington deployed to the Mediterranean. So that's one of the sailors. Then there's a sailor at the shore detachment in Norfolk. So it helps when you've screened at the shore detachment in Norfolk that you know what it looks like. And so then you can write about, this is like, write what you know.
Yeah.
So there's a sailor at the shore detachment in Norfolk, and then an officer that's going through Indian Head. And so that through each of those characters, I show you like, what is a shore detachment like? What's a mobile detachment like? What's like going through the schoolhouse. And then I gave the audience the language. What is a P1? What does it mean if you bip something? And then all those characters at the end of that opening, they each get orders to Ingleside, Texas, and it goes from there. And so it's loosely based on my experiences on that first detachment in Ingleside, to include the Incheon deployment and everything. So it's fiction, but no surprise, influenced by that.
Yeah.
So now I'll weave it. Because I can see where your question is going to go to a Poisoned Chalice, and so now I'm weaving in my instructor thing. So I taught at National Intelligence University, and I had this thing of maybe I want to become a college professor. So I pursued a PhD at King's College London, and I did a study of Operation Earnest Will. Again, heavily influenced by junior officers that mentored me, sailors that mentored me, senior enlisted to me that were junior sailors during Operation Earnest Will. That was their sea stories. That was all I was hearing, all this stuff, and so I became fascinated by it as an operation. And so, what the title refers to is that. So, for those who don't know, Operation Earnest Will was the U.S. Navy's intervention in the Iran-Iraq War at sea. For most of the 1980s, Iran and Iraq were at war. The war on land got bogged down, so they started to attack each other's oil industry, basically going after each other's economic vulnerability, their means to fund the war. Kuwait bore the brunt of Iranian attacks because they had the ships that were supporting and transporting Iraqi oil, and they were giving the Iraqis money and that sort of thing. And so the Kuwaitis asked the United States, can we reflag our tankers as American and receive superpower protection? The United States, we decided to do that. And so that became this operation of escorting tankers. And the Iranians were using mines. They were attacking our ships with mines, and there were several incidents. The motor vessel Bridgeton got hit. Samuel B. Roberts got hit. EOD techs were going out and doing it, going on minesweepers, finding mines, clearing minefields, and the like. So the book covers the entire operation, soup to nuts, but there's a big piece of it is mine warfare. There's one whole chapter that's devoted to mine warfare and everything that happened back then. So, of course, like Proximity, it went through a screening process. The Navy authorized it for public release and everything. So it's actually coming out next spring.
Okay.
What the title refers to is, so when the peace agreement was signed between Iraq and Iran, Khomeini did not actually want to sign it. His advisors were basically like, we got to do this. We got to end this war. And so when he signed it, he said, signing this document is like drinking from a poisoned chalice, but I'm going to do that for Allah's will. And so it's a double entendre. Poisoned chalice, that he signed the peace agreement, but also poisoned chalice, the Gulf itself as a poisoned chalice. Yeah.
No, that's pretty cool. I was wondering where that name came from. That's interesting. Yeah, I think any EOD tech that is interested at all in this mine thing, even if you're not interested in doing it yourself, it's still interesting to hear about, right?
Right.
Because one funny little non-secret is that I think there's a good portion of Navy EOD techs that don't really care about diving, which is hilarious,
right?
Because
I know
we're Navy. But if you are at all interested in this, that your outline in that chapter with mine warfare, it's very interesting to like. I've heard a lot of stories because of doing this podcast,
right?
But it was cool to see someone who spent the time to research it out and have it lined out, the sequence of events basically that led to it. And
thank you. We have to do another shout out for Bill Nesbitt, because you also interviewed him, right?
Yep.
And I interviewed him for the book. I interviewed a bunch of folks. I interviewed Clay. I interviewed Bill Nesbitt, many others. So it's fascinating. I mean, you and I have connected on this in the past. Is we both are history buffs in general, but the Navy history and EOD history, I'm fascinated by the history of our community.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot deeper than when I first came in, for sure. But even after I've been in for a while, our history is a lot deeper and goes into a lot more fingers than I would ever have expected.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. The writing the books. So you've done the fiction, and then this is the nonfiction. How different in terms of the study for it, because you still have to do some research for a fiction book, because if you're talking about an area, you want it to be at least close to correct, because otherwise a reader that's been there could get turned off. So there's a history portion and a research portion to both, but how different was it for the two?
It is absolutely true that if the book does not ring true, if it's not accurate, people are definitely turned off, especially with a military book. And so as an example, I've been to the Naval Academy hundreds of times. I lived there for 4 years. And yet there was a scene there when I was writing The Recipient Son. I went and walked the area that I was thinking about to make sure, is this that far from here? Yep. Okay. They could do this in this amount of time. You have to do that in order for it to be accurate, and for it to ring true. It is different. What I like about fiction is you can be a little bit creative with it. You can take a little bit of liberty with it, and I like the artistry of creating the story. And I wrestled a couple of times in both books. So like in The Recipient Son, the character is he's an orphan, and I was like, it's a Disney movie all over again, right? That's the joke, is all the Disney. And I was like, I did it, but it works from the perspective of, well, you have a young person, they have to go on this journey by themselves. By definition, then, you take away the parental guidance or whatever. For proximity, I had some feedback. One of the things I did was I sent it to folks to read it as I was developing it. And somebody pointed out, and they said, you need to have like a bad guy. And what, again, a side story of it is there's this IED campaign that happens, and the det from Moby Unit 4 or Moby Unit 6 Det 4 encounters this IED in the United States and overseas. And so now they're like, there's this campaign that's, domestic and foreign. So the FBI gets involved. And so again, I had moments when I was writing that, and I said, is this a cliche? Is it, it's almost like whodunit? But then I sat back and said, but that's the artistry of a story. That's how you draw somebody in and everything. And so what I tried to do was I recognized that, and in some cases then leaned into it and was like, all right, this is what it is. And I'm going to accept the criticism and the critique. So the challenge in that was just not trying to be repetitive of what others said, but then you have the freedom. Whereas I definitely needed to get things right for sure in writing A Poisoned Chalice, which originally was my PhD dissertation, because if I didn't get it right then, you're not going to get the PhD, and people are going to read it and they're going to critique and challenge me. Now, I've been challenged on my novels before, but when folks have challenged me on it, I had a woman at one book signing came up and she said, sign the book, and I signed it, and then I handed it to her, and she said, now I have a bone to pick with you after I signed it, right? And just started really giving me a hard time about something. And I was like, okay. And I was like, that's fair. And I said, but at the end of the day, I realized it's fiction. Like it, I got it, but and she was like, oh yeah, okay. So with A Poisoned Chalice, I have to get it right. And what's especially important is I want to get it right because I'm telling other sailor stories. I interviewed, certainly dozens. I don't know if I wouldn't say hundreds, but I interviewed a lot of sailors that served in the conflict. And it's important to me to tell their story accurately. It's important to have if I'm going to be a historian, I want, everything surrounding that to be accurate. And so I would go and I would delve into, and I would look at a lot more source material as I went through it. I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens of source material. And what's interesting is this is one of the differences between the PhD and now the book that's going to be published as a popular history book is in my PhD dissertation, I would have, for certain facts, I'd have 10 citations sometimes. And sometimes in the footnotes, and you have to do this in academic writing, I'd say, well, this person said this, and this person said that, and this person said this, and I think that this person is right, or I'm in the middle, and I think this. So all of a sudden you have this long explanatory note. With a popular book, they're like, no, you pick the most popular one, you get one citation, and that's it, and you got to pull it out. So that was part of the process of turning it into a book, was going through and finding, okay, which one of these was my best source. And so it was interesting. That was fun for me in the sense that as I was doing that transition, I got back into my research and I started rereading things over again and pulling documents out and rechecking myself. And so it's definitely it's sort of two sides of that same coin, trying to make sure that you're accurate.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I asked because I on my last deployment, I started to. I would sit down and I had plenty of time. There was a portion of the deployment where I didn't have a whole lot to do, and I knew that portion was going to be there, and so I had decided I was going to try and start a book, but I have never done anything like that, right? And it was interesting because I started with the thing I know, the EOD portion, right? And like trying to write that. But then I wrote it in one area and I was like, well, I can't put it there because it's too close to things that we're actually doing, right? So I want to put it in a totally different area. And then the reason why I asked the question to you is because then I was like, well, I don't know if I can do it in that area, because I literally looking at the map being like, okay, what geographical area would make this reasonable? And then I'm like, I've never been anywhere near there. So now I'm going to have to find somebody. The whole idea of writing books is interesting. And I think on the surface level, as you're reading it, a well-written book that where somebody has done all that, you don't even notice that they've done all that.
Right.
But there's a lot that goes into it. And just in my little time of thinking, hey, I'm going to write a book, I was like, this is going to be a lot.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I appreciate you recognizing that. Conversely, I've read stuff that is just trash and I've been frustrated by it. And like, this is especially a military book where I know the location, I know the mission, I know holy cow. I mean, it's the reason that Tom Clancy was so good. That guy, He did his research. He really knew what he was talking about. So,
yeah, no, that's awesome. The other piece that was throwing me off from the name of your book is I don't have dyslexia, but sometimes I wish I did, because then it would be an excuse. When I saw Poisoned Chalice, I kept thinking of Poseidon's Chalice, because when I was out on deployment, we did a thing and that was the name of it. And
oh, really?
Yeah. And so the first look at it, I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I actually read the word and I was like, oh, okay, it's just close.
Yeah.
No, so with this book coming out in the spring, are you planning anything beyond that as far as books wise?
I do have a couple of irons in the fire that I'm trying to work out. So, like you, I'm a podcaster, right?
Yep.
So I'm the podcast host for Preble Hall, the Naval History Podcast from the Naval Academy Museum. I'm the podcast host for Talk a Little, Learn a Lot, which is the podcast for the American Society of Naval Engineers. So I have an idea of doing an Ernest Will podcast where I go back and I interview the sailors that participated in it and talk about their experiences, and sort of almost as a companion to the book, have a much longer thing. And so I've started to reach out to some of them and talk to them. And I've actually recorded one with one of the sailors, sort of as a proof of concept to see how that goes.
Yeah.
The other thing that I want to do is I'm already starting to work on the next book. It's also going to be on mine warfare. Working title right now is Bridgeton's Wake. I recently have done a lecture. I've done the lecture twice now at two different forums, where I talk about, so you have Operation Ernest Will, and you had all this MCM, and then you can draw a line from that to, we had Desert Shield and Desert Storm, where it was like the Iraqis realized the challenge of mine warfare from Ernest Will, and so they effectively used mines for Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm. Navy EOD techs were clearing mines in the Gulf for more than a year after that happened. But then we learned our lessons, and so then Operation Iraqi Freedom, we successfully interdicted the mine layers before they were able to do that, before they were able to sow the minefields. So I'm starting to draw a line of like, where are we in the arc of mine warfare? I said before, I felt like the high water mark was when Incheon deployed in 1999, and I want to look at how mine warfare is changing. What does the future look like? And part of that is the technology piece that you and I talked about. Now we have unmanned underwater vehicles that can go and hunt mines, and so we're trying to create this thing of take the man out of the minefield. So that idea is in my head. I'm working through that to try to figure out what that looks like. To start it off, I think I would also go back and look at our successful mine warfare stuff, in the previous conflicts. Like as an example, Operation Starvation we mined most of the Japanese harbors and cut them off from their logistics, and so that was an effective part of the Second World War.
That's interesting. That I actually didn't even realize that. That would be an interesting thing to dive into.
Mm-hmm.
But it is crazy to think like how effective the mining portion is, because without the logistics, without being able to get your ships from point A to point B, people, food, equipment, it can't get there. And so something as simple as the simple mines, but then also mines have gotten a lot more complex since then too.
Right.
Like it's very interesting.
Yeah. Desert Storm's a good example. Saddam Hussein anticipated that we would go and invade Kuwait to help, amphibious landing in Kuwait to, repatriate them. He laid those minefields and all the approaches to Kuwait, and that forced this whole operation where we had to build up forces in Saudi Arabia. They had to do this button hook around, and it was all because of all the mines that they laid out there. It's always curious to realize too. I use the Samuel B. Roberts as an example, and again, that's an Operation Ernest Will mine. So it's a mine that was a World War I design, Russian design mine that was built by North Korea that was sold to Iran that cost them $2,000. And it did $93 million of damage on the Samuel B. Roberts. Thankfully, no sailors were killed on Samuel B. Roberts. People were injured. Nobody was killed, but it took the ship out of the fight. I mean, it's amazing how effective mine warfare can be.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and especially putting that cost value, the ROI on that is excellent in a very bad way towards
right.
us, but
whoever the victim is. Yeah, for
sure. Yeah. So I know we dove into your career in EOD and then how that spilled out over. Is there anything that we didn't hit that you would like to dive into?
Yeah, I was looking at sort of some of our notes from when you and I were prepping for this. I remember this. This is just sort of like a fond memory of my time in EOD, and that was Mark 16 training in Key West, Florida.
Yeah.
So this now we're going back to like the fall of 98 when I first reported aboard Mobile Unit 6. And so at the time, Mobile Unit 6 had its own sort of in-house Mark 16 supervisor training that we held in Key West, Florida. And so the deal was they did the readiness and training folks did some of the training in sort of schoolhouse at Mobile Unit 6 in Charleston, classroom stuff. We might have even done some diving there also before we went to Key West. But then we packed up the boats and everybody went down to Key West. It was maybe 20 of us. And so there was a Mobile Unit 4 in Key West, Florida that at that point had been decommissioned, but the facilities were still there in Truman Annex in Key West, Florida. And so we showed up there and we unpack everything, right? Boats, gear, and everything. And it had O2 clean facilities. And so the plan is we're going to go out and for like 2 weeks, just do a whole bunch of Mark 16 diving and train all of us. And so at the end, we will all be Mark 16 supervisors. And so after sort of all the gears laid up, the R&T leadership sat down and they were like, okay, here's the deal. We're in Key West, Florida. Everybody wants to have fun. We've done this a couple times now, and it's a bad op if people roll in and you've been out drinking and it's a bad, everybody, you're not ready to train. So here's the deal. They said, we're going to do 2 days of training. And on those 2 days, you have to show up every morning ready to go. We're not saying you can't drink, but you have to show up like, no kidding, you're ready to go. And if you don't, we're sending you home and you're getting a bad letter. Like it's going to be badness. But if you follow the rules on the evening of day 2, you guys can go out and hit the town as hard as you want. And day 3, you have off. Day 3 is off, and then recovery. Day 4, you come in. We're going to do 4, and they were like, does everybody agree to this? And everybody was like, yep. By this time, Jaron, I've been fully inculcated in the relationships between officers and enlisted in EOD by that time, right? And I was like, I'm down. And so we had a blast. And so it was crazy. It was, again, the details maybe for another podcast, or not for a podcast, but let's just say it was a great time. And so that was one of those moments where I remember at some point that week, like, yes, this is what I, just the camaraderie that comes from that environment. You just can't get that anyplace else.
Right. Right. There's a 50,000 foot view that says, if you go down there, be a good steward of the money and train every single day, all day. That's what you do. But then there's the realistic aspect where you can get more training value by doing those 2 hard days.
Yep.
Taking some time off, coming back and doing it again. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah. And I think EOD, we have as close to perfected that as possible.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And it was good bonding time, because not all of them, but many of those folks ended up on that Incheon deployment. Again, not everybody. And that for me maybe was the greatest bond that I had across the Mobian at 6, group of folks, was from that evolution.
Yeah. Yeah. We were, I was actually thinking about a year ago, we sent a team down to Key West to do some diving, and we were going back and forth on it because budget stuff is always a concern, right? And the team had done all of their like required qualifications, and so going down there, was it actually necessary or was it not? Well, we made the determination, because there were some personnel changes, that, you know what, not only do they want to do some more advanced diving, which, like, why would we say no to that, right?
Yeah.
But in addition to that, we get a benefit that, hey, they get to bond. They're away from their families, so they don't have to worry about that. They're going to do training together. They're going to focus on that. They're going to have a little fun. We know that. But, there is a huge benefit to getting away, doing stuff with your team where it's just you and your team, and the bonding that comes with that.
No question. No question.
Well, I think there are a few things that we highlight in here that we'll have to, it would be fun to do another podcast where we dive deeper into those, and one where we actually get together. 'Cause I really enjoy, those two, because we can have a little bit of that bourbon. Maybe we can
go.
have a cigar, light up a fire, and have some fun. But this was awesome. I appreciate you reaching out and being willing to share your career and dive into some of those things. It's been a good time.
Well, Jaron, thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation. And so I've really enjoyed listening to the podcast. So I'm as you know, I'm a podcast host too.
Yeah.
You do a great job. You're a great host. You really make people feel welcome, and not everybody can do this. You have the skill set from it. So I'm taking some notes from you, man, on that front. And so for sure, I want to come down sometime. I am in the Norfolk area on a regular basis. So I want to come down there and let's do that. Do another one.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great. Until then, again, appreciate you coming on. Thank you for listening to the Echo Oscar Delta podcast, where we talk to Navy EOD techs and hear the stories that they want to share.